Okay, so we are in chapter 15 here of the book of Judges, Shofetim Perek Tetvav. We left off in the middle of a story about Shimshon. So it's been a couple of weeks. Let's just refresh our memories as to where we were so that we know where to pick up. Basically, we started in chapter 14 with Shimshon's first experience with the Pilishtim. Shimshon catches a glimpse of a Pilishti woman. We don't know what her name is. We never find out. He desires to marry her. His parents fight him on it, but to no avail. He's adamant. The text goes through the back and forth of arranging the marriage, during the course of which several meetings, he tears open a lion, and then the lion carcass gets taken over by bees who make a beehive. When he finally gets married, he gives this riddle to his groomsmen to see if they will be able to figure it out. Of course, they're unable to until they persuade Shimshon's wife to give them the answer. Shimshon knows that they cheated, and so he kills 30 people, takes their garments to pay back the debt that he owes for the wager that he quote unquote lost, but basically makes it a loss for the Pilishtim. And in his disgust for his wife, who he currently married, giving them the answer, he sort of abandons her and goes back to his father's home. So and as a result of that, the Pilishti father of Shimshon's wife thinks that Shimshon's not coming back. He takes that as a sign that Shimshon's not interested in his daughter anymore. He must be wanting to divorce her, and therefore marries her off to another man. That's where we left off. Shimshon has already had some dicey relationships with the Pilishtim. They've been at odds. There's tension there, back and forth. Now we have his wife being married off to another man because they think that Shimshon's never coming back. Let's begin in chapter 15, where Shimshon does make a return to claim his wife back, only to find out that his wife's been married off to somebody else without his permission, and we'll see his reaction to that. So we'll read the Pisukim, and then we'll try and talk about some of the ideas. A lot of this we're going to have to really read through chapters 15 and then also chapter 16, because you really have to take a look at Shimshon's experience as a whole to kind of get the full flavor. But we will mention some points as we go through. And sometime later, during the time of the wheat harvest, Shimshon decides to return and remember his wife, and he brings a kid goat as an offering to her, sign of appeasement. And he says to his father-in-law, I'm ready to now reclaim my wife, to come back with her in the room. The father says, I don't give you permission to come and to be with my daughter. Her father says, Amor amarti ki sano seneta. I surely said that you surely hate her. I took your absence as a sign, and especially the terms of where that absence came, that you were disgusted with her for uncovering your riddle and causing you to lose the bet. So it seemed like Shimshon was very upset at her and then leaves for an extended period. He says, I took that as, you weren't coming back, that you were divorcing her. And therefore I gave her to one of your colleagues, to one of your groomsmen. Behold, her younger sister is even better than her. Let her be instead of her. Let her be in her place. This is a fascinating pasuk. What do you see here, right? It harkens back to some things we might have seen in the past, maybe to some Tanakh. I wonder if that recalls anything for anybody. But at face value, it's one thing if her father said, I thought you were divorcing her, so, go home, I'll see you later. But the father then says, I thought you were divorcing her, just take her younger sister instead. Like the ease with which the Pilishtim just throw people out there. Like there's no sanctity to marriage, sanctity to a relationship. Okay, so you got rid of this one, I gave her to him, you take this one, it's all the same, right? It's almost as if that was their practice. They don't care. And in fact, he tries to entice Shimshon by saying, no, the younger one is better than the older one. You'll have, it'll be better for you with this one than the other one. So just take her. Now that could be because of his fear for Shimshon. They already know Shimshon is a very special individual with very unique capabilities as far as his strength is concerned. So it could be that in his fear for what Shimshon might do, he tried to come up with something that would put him at bay, which is obviously not going to work. But you see the decrepit sense of what Pelishti society was, the ease with which he just says, she went to him, take it. That's the type of people that Shimshon is dealing with over here. It's morally deficient, and there's no question about it. Does anybody know what the Tanakh story that I'm referencing here? Does anybody see anything like a story here in Tanakh that maybe comes to mind?
Is it like Rachel Leah, kind of?
Beatrice, that's what came to mind for me, to be honest with you. Like a switching of daughters. Here it's the opposite, right? Yaakov wanted the younger, he got switched for the older, and then he had to take it. But like the Pelishtim are very resembling of Lavan. Like, just take this one instead of this one. That way, switch them on us, right? It's what's the big deal? They're all the same. It's all that. So you're getting. I thought too also to the story of Rachel and Leah and Lavan switching them. It speaks to that idea as well. And so we know Lavan as being an incredibly morally deficient person. Certainly the Pelishtim seem to be in that same avenue as well. I thought that was interesting. That's just something that came to mind as I was reading the Pesukim. We continue on with verse 3. Now, Shimshon, we know, is looking for reasons to attack the Pelishtim. In many ways, you could say that he's been setting this situation up for quite some time. If you go back to chapter 14, it was very critical that when he first saw the woman that he wanted and his parents were trying to convince him out of it, the pasuk says, "Ve'aviv ve'imo lo yad'u ki me'adonai." His parents didn't know that this was from God. And we explained in the previous class, does that mean God orchestrated it or it just after the fact? But in the end of the day, Shimshon is looking for openings to attack the Pelishtim on his own without involving the rest of the nation, without involving the rest of the people. He's doing this in a sort of an isolated way. So Shimshon got involved with them, and every time they misstep, Shimshon does something back and then looks for another avenue to be able to retaliate. This way, he's able to create a ruse that he's attacking the Pelishtim for their behavior, when in reality, he's doing it because of the oppression that they're doing to the Jewish people. So he's looking for excuses, and here he finds a perfect one. He was married to a Pelishti woman. The Pelishti father took his wife away from him, and he's upset about it. And so now he goes to town. Vayomer lahem Shimshon. In verse 3, Shimshon says to them, Niketi hapa'am mePelishtim. The Pelishtim have no claim against me now. They can't say that I did anything wrong. Ki oseh ani imam ra'ah. Now I'm going to do evil with them. Vayelech Shimshon vayilkod shelosh me'ot shu'alim. Shimshon goes and he captures 300 shu'alim. Shu'alim are foxes or fox-like animals. In the Steinsaltz, he says that it's jackals, which jackals are pack animals, and therefore it might have been easier for Shimshon to gather 300 of them together. But of course, they're also, I don't want to say vicious animals, but they're aggressive animals. So the fact that Shimshon, in his strength, was able to tame them to take 300 jackals together is pretty remarkable. What does he do? Vayikach lapidim. He takes torches set on fire. Vayifen zanav el zanav, and he ties them tail to tail. So he ties each jackal tail to tail with a torch set on fire in between them. And vayasem lapid echad ben shnei hazinavot batavich, and he places a torch in between the pair of tails that have been tied together. Vayaver ish balapidim, verse 5. He lit the torches and turned the foxes loose. Vayshalach bekamot pelishtim, and he turned the foxes loose in the standing grain fields of the Pelishtim. And as a result, in the chaos and pandemonium of these foxes or jackals, they burn up the entire city. They basically send their fire all over the place, and they're burning up homes and vineyards and olive groves and so on and so forth. And so he does a tremendous amount of financial damage, economic damage to the Pelishtim in this very interesting, cleverly crafted I don't want to call it a prank, but retaliation. Yeah.
Is he planning on having the Jewish people then come live there? Because if he is, then he's burning his bridges.
Yeah. You're saying because he's destroying the land and now they're going to inhabit a destroyed land. I don't know that he's thinking that far ahead. In other words, the goal right now is to drive to just rid themselves of the Pelishtim, or at least retaliate enough to the point where they loosen their grip on the Jewish people, where they start to realize this is happening because they're showing so much oppression to Am Yisrael. So I don't know that he's thinking about, hey, we want to eventually take this control of this, so I don't want to burn it down. At this point, he's just looking for retaliation. Let's go to verse 6. So now, what did the Pelishtim think of this? Vayomeru Pelishtim mi asazot. The Pelishtim see what happens, and they say, who did this? Vayomeru Shimshon hatan hatimni. They say it's Shimshon, the son-in-law of this Timnite man. Kilakach et ishto, because the man took his wife, vayitena lemere'eho, and they gave it to the groomsmen. Vayalu Pelishtim vayisrefu ota ve'et aviha ba'esh. And the Pelishtim go, and who do they attack? They attack the Pelishti father and the Pelishti girl who were married to Shimshon. They burn them alive, and they kill them. It's fascinating, right? Exactly. Why? Shimshon was the one who set these 300 foxes with the torches free, and they want to know who did this. They find out it's Shimshon. So they already know when we can't mess with Shimshon. They already know. They've had enough incidences already with him that they're not prepared to start retaliating back, because every time they retaliate, there's an exponential fight back on the part of Shimshon. So what do? They think we're going to stop this dead in our tracks by attacking the father and wife of Shimshon, the father-in-law and wife of Shimshon, that hopefully that will send the message to Shimshon, we took care of it, they're gone, and let's stop this dead in our tracks at this point. They were the one who triggered Shimshon. They know that he gave her as a wife to somebody else, and that's what triggered Shimshon. So it's on them, right? They really should attack Shimshon, but they're not going to, because they know they can't, right? They know that Shimshon is beyond their grasp, right? Now, beautifully, what does Shimshon do? Vayomen lahem Shimshon says, what are you doing? You just killed my wife and father-in-law? Im ta'asun kazot, if that's what you're going to do to my wife and father-in-law, ki im nikamti bachem ve'achar echdal. If this is how you act, I'm not going to rest now, and I'm going to take another revenge against you. And in verse 8, vayach otam shok al yarech makkah gedolah. He gave them a sound and thorough thrashing. It doesn't say how many people he killed, but he clearly inflicted tremendous damage, not just on their financial aspects this time. Now he kills people. He goes and he lives in this cave of the rock of Etam. So the whole story is, in a way, a bit comical. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but it's comical and ironic that every time the Pelishtim do something, they set off Shimshon. And every time they think they're going to do something that's going to calm the situation, it only escalates Shimshon. And each time Shimshon finds an opening to be able to retaliate against the Pelishtim, right? It's pretty fascinating, right? So he's upset at his wife and father-in-law for having deceived him, so he attacks the Pelishtim. The Pelishtim don't attack him back, they attack the wife and father-in-law. They say, hey, that's my wife and father-in-law. What do you think you're doing? I attack you again, right? So every time they do something, Shimshon just finds a way to attack them back. It's pretty amazing, huh? It's pretty smart on the part of Shimshon, knowing that that's his goal. But he's not afraid of the risks at this stage, because he's fighting the battle one on however many. He's not involving his people into it. And that's actually a perfect segue into the next part of the chapter. Because now what happens in the next part of the chapter is the Pelishtim have to figure out how we're going to control this guy, right? Everything we do just seems to set him off, right? So how are we going to control this guy? Now we're going to control him. We got to go to the people. We got to go to his people. We got to start making a threat on his nation and turn his own people against him, right? And that's their next goal. That's their next attempt to try to subdue Shimshon. A theme that we have all throughout is, how do they put Shimshon at bay? How do they subdue him? How do they tie him up? Is a constant theme that's going to go on, that has been going on and will continue to go on through the Shimshon narrative. So that's part one. We move to now part two, how the Pelishtim try to get the Jews involved in turning Shimshon in themselves. So let's take a look at verse 9. Vaya'alu Pelishtim vayahanu b'Yehuda. The Pelishtim come up and they set up their camp close to the tribe of Yehuda. And this is an act of threatening. This is an act of war. Vayinateshu balehi, and they spread out over a place called Lehi. Lehi literally means a jaw. And we will see in the course of the story why the name of the place is called jaw. It's called jaw based on something that Shimshon is going to do here in this chapter. That's why I got the name of that place. So right now we'll just call it the name of the place. It's called Lehi. So the Pelishtim make a threat against the tribe of Judah, tribe of Yehuda, that they're about to attack them. And the tribe of Yehuda doesn't know why this is happening. They're not aware of all the things that are going on, or maybe they're playing coy because they're pretending like they don't know what Shimshon's doing. Vayomeru ish Yehuda lama alitem alenu. The men of Yehuda say, why have you come and approached upon us? Why have you brought your camp to come and attack us? Vayomeru, the Pelishtim respond, le'esor et Shimshon alinu. We have come to detain Shimshon. And Shimshon, as we said before, is hiding out in this place called Sela Etam, which is apparently a place within the tribe of Yehuda. La'asot lo ka'asher asalanu. We want to do to him what he did to us. We want vengeance. We want payback. Now, the Jews are scared of the Pelishtim. The Pelishtim have been a forceful enemy against them, right? And as a result, they don't want to take any chances. They're not exactly in line with what Shimshon is doing, right? Shimshon's kind of acting on his own. He's a vigilante of sorts. And the Jewish people are not sanctioning. They might be hearing from it from afar, and they might be happy with what's going on, but they're doing everything they can to separate themselves from Shimshon. And now that the Pelishtim are threatening to attack them, they're definitely afraid of the Pelishtim. They say, this is not worth it. We got to turn Shimshon in. We don't really like what he's doing. And this is partially the tragedy of Shimshon. The tragedy of Shimshon is, as we noted in his choice of being a Nazir, or not his choice, the fact that Nazirut was imposed upon him, was a sign by God that the rest of the Jewish people should be following Shimshon. They should be gravitating to Shimshon spiritually and physically. Here, Shimshon doesn't rally the people. God expects that the people will rally around Shimshon when they see the amazing things that he's doing. And that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. The people are adversarial to Shimshon. They try to separate themselves from Shimshon because they think Shimshon's going to get them into trouble, which is what he did, right? But instead of turning around and saying to the Pelishtim, absolutely not, we will never turn in a man of our own. We support Shimshon and we're going to fight back with you, and Shimshon's going to be our leader, which is probably what they should have said. That's what they don't say that at all. What happens in verse 11? Vayeredu sheloshet alafim ish mi Yehuda. 3,000 men from the tribe of Yehuda go down el seif sela etam. They go to the place where they know Shimshon is hiding out. Vayomeru le Shimshon. They say to Shimshon, Halo yadata ki moshlim banu Pelishtim? Do you not know that the Pelishtim are ruling over us? Like, what do you think you're doing? You think you're doing these little acts of war that are helping us? It's not. The Pelishtim rule over us. You're causing us more problems. Uma zot asita lanu. What is this that you're doing to us? It's almost like that. It's like the Jews against Moshe in the desert, right? Moshe does something good for them, and then it looks at Moshe, what are you doing? We should have died in Egypt. Why'd you bring us here to die in the desert? It's a typical Jewish form of complaining. Someone does something good for you, but you don't love it, and you're in a different mindset and a different head, and you blame him for doing something bad. They're complaining to Shimshon. Shimshon's single-handedly decimating the Pelishtim, their oppressors. But now they're nervous about war. They're ready to turn him in at the drop of a hat. Huh? It's a tremendous lack of emunah on the part of the people, right? On the part of the people. There is a little bit of an indictment on Shimshon that Shimshon does not seek to rally the people at the same time, right? Shimshon is hoping the people will follow, but at the same time, he's also not that charismatic leader that's bringing the people in. And that might, there's a two-way street here. But yes, it's definitely they don't even know why he's doing what he's doing. They think he's crazy, right? He thinks they're doing more harm. It's like, I don't know if this is a good analogy, but it's like people who were rebelling against the Nazis in the concentration camp. You're going to hurt the rest of us. They're going to do something bad to the rest of us. That's how they looked at it. And that's a rough comparison, I know. Definitely not perfect, but to that extent, that's the kind of feeling that the Jews have over here. Shimshon, you're causing us more problems by rebelling. Just let's fly under the radar and keep it where it
One
is.
student does something bad, the whole class
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's a better one. A little less, right? One student does something bad, the whole class gets in trouble. That's a little bit more of an easy does it type of mashal. Okay. So what do they say? What are you doing to us? Shimshon says, what they did to me, I did back to them. Notice each party is saying they don't want to retaliate. The Pelishtim are saying we're here to do to him what he did to us. Shimshon says, well, yeah, I did to you what you did to me. So you started it. It's like a back and forth playground argument. So the Jews say, they say to Shimshon, we came here to tie you up, to turn you in. We're going to give you over to the Pelishtim, and you're going to be judged in a Pelishtim court, and you're going to be handled by the Pelishtim. In some ways, by the way, to be melamed zechut on the Jewish people, Shimshon married a Pelishtim, right? So the Jews might be a little confused as to where his alliance really lies. He was so good at hiding himself from the Jews and attacking the Pelishtim solo so not to get the Jews in trouble, that he also alienated the Jews from him himself. He married a Pelishtim. So the Jews say, look, you married a Pelishtim, so go live with them, go be with them. You're not one of us anymore, right? Vayomen lahem Shimshon. Shimshon says to them, Hishave'uli, swear to me, pen tifke'un bi'atim, that you will not be the ones to attack me. Shimshon is deathly afraid. This is where you see a little bit of the sensitivity of Shimshon and his allegiance to the Jewish people. He is deathly afraid of attacking his own brothers. He does not want to have to attack the Jews themselves. And so he's saying, look, I don't mind if you tie me up and turn me into the Pelishtim, but it can't be you who attack me. Because if it's you who attack me, then I have to attack back. And I don't want to have to attack anybody back and kill anybody from my own people. I will if I'm pushed that way, so swear to me that you won't do it. Just leave me to the Pelishtim. In other words, Shimshon is fine with being handed over to the Pelishtim. He doesn't care. Shimshon knows that the Spirit of God will come over him and his superhuman strength will get him out of whatever issues that he has. He knows he has that divine protection to help him. He just doesn't want to have to unleash that superhuman strength on his own people. And this is where you see a little bit of his sensitivity, his connection with the Jewish people. Vayomeru, the Jews say, Lemor, lo, no, that's not what our intentions are. Ki asorna asorcha, we're just going to tie you up and bind you, untanucha biyadam, and we're going to give you over to the Pelishtim. Vehamet lo nemitecha, we have no intentions of putting you to death. Vayasruhu bishnaim avotim hadashim, they bind him up in 2 new ropes, vaya'aluhu min hasala, and they bring him up from the rock where he was hiding. It's important that he says that the text tells us that they were bound up by 2 new ropes, meaning that they're sturdy, they're strong, and yet they're not going to be any match for Shimshon. Verse 14. Huba ad Lehi, they reached the place of Lehi where the Pelishtim are encamped. Upelishtim heri'u likrato, the Pelishtim start to mock him. They start to blow their trumpets and call out derision towards him. And they start to shout at meeting him because they know, oh, here comes the person we've been trying to capture. It's like when a guy goes through a prison and all the cellmates are screaming at him and this and that. That's what they're doing. It's a sign of mocking him. And what happens at that moment? Vatitzlach alav ruach Adonai. The Spirit of God comes upon Shimshon. Vatiyena ha'avotim asher al zero'otav, and the ropes that are on his arms, kapishtim asher ba'aru ba'esh. They are like flax that catches fire, just disintegrates, melts away from his body. Vayimasu asurav me'al yadav, and the bonds melted off his hands. That's how, with ease, the strength comes to Shimshon that nothing is going to hold him back. Continuing on in verse 15. Vayimtza lehi hamor tiriyah. He finds the jawbone of a donkey, a fresh jawbone of a donkey, which means the donkey must have died there just recently. Vayishlach yado vayikaheha. He stretches his hand and takes the jawbone of the donkey. Vayachba elef ish. He uses the jawbone to kill 1,000 people. Jawbone was a common weapon. They would make weapons out of bone because it was very sturdy and they could sharpen it. But to just find it randomly and use it to kill 1,000 people is just insane, right? Vayomer Shimshon belechi hahamor hamor hamoratayim. And now Shimshon poetically says, with belechi hahamor, with the jawbone of the donkey, hamor hamoratayim. Here he says the word hamor in a different context. It's a play on words, it's a pun. He uses the word hamor like chomarim, chomarim, means piles and piles. He says, I used the hamor to create chomarim, chomarim. I used the jawbone of the donkey to heap upon them heaps and heaps of dead people. In other words, that's how quickly and easily he slaughtered the Pelishtim. Belechi hamor, with the jawbone of the donkey, he keti elef ish. I killed 1,000 people. So for all the derision and mocking that the Pelishtim offered him when he was bound up, who gets the last laugh? It's Shimshon, as we typically see, although it won't be the case next chapter. Verse 17, Vahi kechaloto ledaber, and it was when he finished speaking, Vayashlech halechi miyado. He casts the jawbone from his hand, Vayikra lamakom hahu ramat lehi, and he called this place Ramat Lehi. That's why it's called Lehi. Lehi meaning jawbone, right? From the fact that Shimshon killed 1,000 people in that spot with the jawbone of the donkey. So that's the incident. Now the aftermath is particularly interesting. At this point, it would seem that the Spirit of God has now melted away once the incident is over. The Spirit of God has left from Shimshon, and this has an effect on him. Verse 18, Vayitzma me'od. Shimshon is now incredibly thirsty. Killing 1,000 people will do that to you. Vayikra el Adonai vayomar. And what does he do? He turns to God and he says, Ata natata biyad avdecha. You put these people in the hands of your servant. Et hateshuah hagedolah hazot. And you brought this great salvation for your people. Ve'ata amut batzama. And now I'm going to die of great thirst. V'nafalti biyad ha'arelim. And I'm going to fall into the hands of the uncircumcised. In other words, Shimshon says to God, God, I don't understand. You brought this spirit upon me so that I could do your work and kill these people and bring a salvation to the Jewish people. And now I'm going to die from thirst and I'm going to fall into the hands of the Pelishtim. How does that fare? How does that make sense? Right? It's an aggressive claim by Shimshon against God. It's rational and makes sense. He's saying, God, I did all this for you, and now I'm going to die and go into the hands of the enemy. You have a responsibility to help me. It's not a wrong claim on the part of Shimshon, but how does it make you feel? Right? He killed 1,000 people. He can't look for a jug of water. Yeah, maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe.
Like, in a nice way. Hashem gave all the spirit and everything. Like, why can't you just ask nicely?
Right. So I think, again, it's a justified claim, and I'm going to bring it back to the desert, right? When the Jews complained to Moshe for water, 3 days, no water, complaining about food, they're justified complaints. The problem with them is that they're mispresented, right? They're brought in the form of complaints of why did you do this? It's calling out God instead of saying, God, thank you so much for this opportunity. Please afford me the water because your humble servant is asking for it, right? There is a little bit of that. He does, we have to balance it, right? There's a little bit of that where Shimshon says, he calls himself Avdecha, your servant, and he says, I did your bidding, but there's a little bit of sharpness. There's a little bit of an antagonistic undertone to the way in which he phrases this tefillah towards God, almost indicating, God, you owe it to me. You have to give this to me, because how will it look if I die after doing your work because you didn't provide me water, right? And he's essentially saying, God, you didn't have to make me thirsty, but the fact that I'm thirsty now doesn't make sense of how this is working, right? I think it's important to keep this tefillah in the back of our minds if we can. There's going to be another time when Shimshon, this is going to be a next chapter, so hold this in your memory bank a little bit. And this is why I said you really have to read the narrative of Shimshon all together to really appreciate the fullness of everything. We're doing it one chapter at a time, but try to keep this in the back of your mind, and we'll come back to it hopefully next class. Because in our next Perek, when Shimshon is at his last stand against the Pelishtim, he turns to God in prayer again, and that prayer is going to have a very different tone, a very different type of approach from Shimshon to God, different than this one, and that's going to help us to understand the growth of Shimshon from where he is now to where he eventually is at the end of his experience, okay? So hold this tefillah in the back of our minds. We said it's a little bit of a combination of both. On the one hand, he is understanding what he is turning to God. The very fact that he's turning to God is in and of itself something. He's acknowledging God, he's praying to God, he calls him my servant, but he doesn't use God's name. He says Ata, but he doesn't use God's name. The text tells us Vayikra el Adonai vayomar, but in the words that he says, he doesn't use God's name. He says Ata, you. And he has a little bit of an attitude type tone to what he's asking from God. So we'll keep that in our memory bank, and that's where we are at this point. God does respond, however, to Shimshon, much like he responds to the Jewish people in the desert. Vayivka Elohim et hamachtesh asher balechi. God splits open the hollow, which is at Lehi. In other words, he splits open like a rock, basically there. Vayetzeu mimenu mayim, and water comes out of it, flowing. So again, this is another motif to the desert, right? Water coming out of a rock. Vayesht, and as a result, Shimshon is able to drink. Vatashov ruho vayechi, and his spirit comes back to him. His strength is there, and he's revived. Al ken kara shema ein hakore asher balechi ad hayom hazeh. And for this reason, the name of the place is called Ein HaKoreh, which is in a place called Lehi, ad hayom hazeh, until this period of time. Finally, Pasuk 20, Vayishpot et Yisrael bimei Pelishtim 20 shana. In totality, Shimshon judged the Jewish people during the times of the Pelishtim for 20 years. Now, let's take a moment on this pasuk. What is this pasuk, this type of a pasuk? We've been studying Shofetim for quite a bit of time, and we've seen this type of a pasuk at the end of a story that happened. Hi, everybody. Sorry about that. We had a weird malfunction there. It looks like we're still up and running and still recording even. So, okay, that's good. Okay, we're back. What were we saying? I'll share my screen again. Okay. We're on Judges 15. I got to pull it back up. So what were we saying? Remind me. Oh, the last pasuk. Yes. So what does it usually say when you read a pasuk at the end of the story? The pasuk says, we've had this many times before, right? That you'll have a pasuk that says, oh, and the judge judged the Jewish people for this number of years. What does it usually signal? Yeah, that usually signals the end of the term, right? Okay, that you know, they give us the story, what happened, how they saved us from the person and from the oppressors and da-da-da. And overall, this judge judged them for this amount of years during this time, and then they moved on. And sometimes they die, or they talk about the die, whatever it is. They'll talk about the death, what time, how long, so on and so forth. But that's not the case here. There's something odd here that happens, right? The text seems to wrap up for a moment the story of Shimshon by telling us that he judged the Jewish people for 20 years. But then we go back to more narratives about Shimshon, right? In the next chapter, we're going to start a brand new story about Shimshon and the Pelishtim. So it's fascinating. What's kind of going on over here? It sounds like to the reader, if you didn't know what was coming next and you just ended off on this chapter, you'd say, okay, oh, Vayishpotet b'nei Yisrael b'mei Pelishtim 20 shana. He judged the Jewish people for 20 years. That's the end of Shimshon. We're moving on to somebody else. But that's not true, because look how chapter 16 begins. Vayelech Shimshon azata. We're going to continue talking about Shimshon, right? And we're going to have a whole other story about how Shimshon's going to go. And he's going to have an incident with Delilah. We're going to read all about this in our next class. And then what's going to happen? Shimshon will die. Okay, we're going to read to, I'm just going to scroll all the way down. Shimshon is going to die. And then all the way at the end of next chapter, Pasuk 31, they collect his bones, they collect his body. And it says this again, V'hu shafatet Yisrael 20 shana, and he judged the Jewish people for 20 years. So the reader is left perplexed. Why would the text of the Torah, why would the text of the Navi interject here with how long Shimshon is going to judge the people for 20 years before the stories of Shimshon are actually over, and then repeat it again at the end of Shimshon's actual demise?
He judged the Philistine, and now it's that he judged Israel.
He judged Pelishtim during the days of the Pelishtim. Right. So first it says, the pasuk in our thing is Vayishpotet Israel. He judged the Jewish people b'mei Pelishtim during the days of the Pelishtim 20 shana. Then at the end of chapter 16, I'm scrolling down to verse 31. It says V'hu shafatet Israel 20 shana. It doesn't say b'mei Pelishtim, but so maybe there's something to that omission. I'm not sure. So you want to say maybe it means that it was 20 years until that point, and then the story restarts, and in total it was 40 years. Interesting. I had not seen a commentary that gave that. It's possible, not entirely impossible. I want to see how we get over here. Barbanel gives us something, I think maybe small, but not sure. Yeah, he says Bimei Pelishtim, in the days that the Pelishtim ruled over them. It doesn't sound like it. It sounds like it's the same 20 years that they're talking about, because the first 20 years it says Bimei Pelishtim, during the days of the Pelishtim, which is going to continue into the next chapter. It sounds like a weird interlude on the part of the text. I understood it differently. I understood that the text is basically saying where the story of Shimshon should end. Right? The story of Shimshon should end at this point, perhaps here, right? Or at least there's a break in the story. In other words, Shimshon has done his part. He's killed 1,000 people. He's had back and forth retaliations with the Philistine. He's proved that he's superhuman. He can now judge the Jewish people. Apparently, he's relaxed maybe the oppression of the Philistine towards the Jewish people, because he's able to judge the Jewish people himself versus during the time of the Philistine. There might be some of that aspect to it. But then what does chapter 16 start? It actually starts with Shimshon's initiative. Look what Shimshon does. I'll read to you the beginning of chapter 16, and you'll see how bizarre it is what Shimshon does. Verse number 1. I'm reading now into chapter 16. We're just going to read the first 3 verses. Vayelech Shimshon azata. Shimshon goes to Gaza. So he initiates now a new confrontation with the Philistine. Vayar sham isha zona, and he sees a prostitute. Vayavo eleha, and he cohabits with her. That's already mind-blowing, right? We're talking about a leader of the Jewish people, someone who's a Nazir, who's supposed to control his urges and desires, right? As far as wine goes, as far as other things go. And not only did we have in the first chapter, he married a Philistine woman, now he's cohabiting with a prostitute. This is like unheard of for people who are considered great men in the lore of Jewish leaders, right? And what happens? La'azatim lemor, the people from Gaza learn, Ba Shimshon henna, Shimshon has come to our region. Vayasobu vaye'ervu lo kol halayla b'sha'ar ha'ir. And so they surround the house of the harlot, and they lay an ambush during the course of the night that they're going to trap him in when he leaves the house of the harlot. and they're standing at the gates of the city. They're using the gates, knowing this apparently is a completely gated area. Shimshon cannot get out. They feel he's trapped. So they lay the ambush and they're ready to attack him. They say, we got Shimshon right where we want him. He's cornered. They wait there all night long, whispering to each other. Ad or haboker v'hargenuhu. The light of the morning will come and we'll kill him. What does Shimshon do? Of course, Shimshon gets up in the middle of the night. Vayishkav Shimshon ad chatzi halayla. Shimshon lies in the house of the harlot until midnight. Vayakom b'hatzi halayla. He gets up in the middle of the night. Vaye'ehoz b'daltot sha'ar ha'ir. He grabs on to the gates of the city. Ubishteh ha'mezuzot, and the two posts. Vayisa'em im ha'beriach, and he pulls them with his strength out of the ground. He pulls up the iron gates of the city out of the ground, the whole thing, and carries them on his back. Vayasim al ketefav, and he carries the gates of the city on his back. We're talking about ancient cities that had gates that took an army to put up. Single-handedly, he lifts them. Vaya'alem al rosh hahar, and he carries them up the mountain. Asher al peneh Hebron, that is near Hebron. And when the people of Gaza see what Shimshon did, they understood what happened. They know that their little traps are not going to be much of an obstacle for someone like Shimshon to overcome. But Shimshon is the one who engages them, and he does so for his own bodily functions, right? What's the point of this? It's very strange. Shimshon almost actively puts himself in harm's way to fulfill his desire with this woman, and he gets out of it. Presumably God helps him, which is strange in and of itself, but there's almost no purpose to this. And now the escapades continue. He's going to go marry Delilah, and then Delilah is going to trick him, and he's going to end up uncovering his secret, and he's going to meet his demise. But I think that there's the hint of the end of chapter 15 is that really this is where the narrative should end from this perspective. Shimshon has done his job. The Jews have rallied around him. We should hear something about now an army and an attack against the Philistine or some kind of salvation or something of that nature. But we don't. Instead, the continuation in chapter 16 is Shimshon with a harlot and him getting more and more involved in the Philistine lifestyle and marrying the Philistine and cohabiting with them. And that's going to spiral out of control for Shimshon. We will see at the end of Shimshon's demise that he tries to turn it around. He tries to come back, and Shimshon is perhaps one of the most complicated individuals in all of Tanakh, certainly in the book of Shofetim. How he's navigating this God-given strength and this God-given talent and his fact that he's a Nazir, which all brings him so close to God, yet he's at the same time engaged in Philistine culture and marrying women and fulfilling his bodily desires. Now, we could try and say that Shimshon is doing all of this as a plot to try to get in and kill and this and that, and it's all calculated for God, and he's doing these sins for the purposes of helping the Jewish people. You can make that argument. I think we saw that the Radak made that argument in chapter 14, that we cannot criticize Shimshon too much. This was the avenue that he took. But in the end of the day, even the rabbis themselves are not happy with what Shimshon did. They say his eyes were plucked out because he used his eyes to look at women and to try and fulfill his desires with them. So, and the story itself is just hard for the reader to comprehend and to kind of put into context. It's very, very challenging for the reader themselves. And so he's a complicated figure with a very dynamic personality, with a lot of these crazy things that are happening. But the story probably from here should go in a different direction, which is what I think the hint of the text over here is. But unfortunately, it goes in the direction that we don't want it to go. And that's what we're going to hopefully explore in next week's chapter. So next week's chapter is really going to pull the whole story together. It's going to be Shimshon's final hurrah with Delilah, and what happens with the Philistine and how he meets his end, and maybe how at the very end he turns things around. We're going to try to peer into the depth of the character of Shimshon and who he is and who he represents, to try to get what his legacy is and how we think of him, which is a typical thing that we do with all our judges, is to see what their final legacy is and what we gain from them. And hopefully reading that final story will sort of pull all the pieces together and we'll get something of a makeup of who Shimshon was. Again, it's incredibly deep, and there's so many different angles that one can take, but we'll try to explore it as much as possible. In the meantime, we leave off here in the middle of the story, and next week we'll continue with chapter 16. We learned a few lessons here that I think are important. We see Shimshon's sensitivity towards his people, but the idea that leader and follower, leader and nation have to be in sync with each other. I think that's really the biggest thing that I see in this chapter, is that the leaders have to be in tune with the people they're leading, and the nation has to be in tune with their leaders. And unfortunately, Shimshon, as we'll see, is the most isolated of all of the Shofetim. He doesn't ever really connect with his people, although he has tremendous sensitivity for them. They never really follow him. He never really leads them. He judges them, but we don't see him really rally them together in the cause of trying to undermine the Pelishtim. We don't see a major religious transformation on the part of the people. And in that sense, Shimshon maybe falls short, but really the people fall short together with him. It's really a team effort. There's a disconnect between leader and people. And that's why I think it's so important. One of the things that we're learning about Shofetim is to have leader and people, leader and nation, sort of on the same page, in tune with each other. And that's something that we'll see when we get into the next books of monarchy with David and Shaul, that's one of the points of emphasis that the book makes, is to see how in tune the leader is with the rest of his people. And so whenever you're leading somebody, you got to be in their head. You got to see, how am I going to get these people to come with me? I can't do everything myself. And the people have to say, we shouldn't just send the leader out to do everything. We need to be with him. We need to kind of help him and be on par with him. If there's a synergy between leader and people, that's when you're going to be successful. If there's a divide, it's going to be much more challenging. So maybe that's one small takeaway from chapter 15. We'll leave ourselves there. We'll pick up with chapter 16 and wrap up the stories and saga of Shimshon before moving on to other stories in the book of Shofetim. Any questions or comments or thoughts on this chapter? All right. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see everybody next week. Take care.
Thank you.
Enjoy.